read 5 Lessons, Hogan's second book. He has 3 pages in there on the Waggle, and then 1 page talking about it. He says it's the most important part of the swing, or one of the most important parts. The old Scottish phrase is, as you waggle, so shall ye swing. In fact, he does today what's the most common type of waggle, where you hinge back your trail wrist back and forth like that.
Jim, it's an audio podcast. You use your words.
So hinging your wrist means you flex your wrist backward, the back of your trail hand. So right hand, if you're a right-handed golfer, goes back toward your forearm, not up toward the sky. That's called cocking. So when you hinge back and then forth a little bit, that's the Hogan waggle. And what it does is it reduces the tendency for your mind and body to get frozen from stress or from pressure. So when you're waggling, you're keeping some sense of athletic fluid motion in your body.
Hi, this is Ron Mulligan from Lake Orion, Michigan, and I play West Wind Golf Course in Rochester, Michigan. This is Golf Smarter number 910.
To waggle or not to waggle? Is that the question? Let's find out with Jim Waldron.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Jimmy.
Hey, man, how's it going, Fred? Glad to be here.
It's glad to have you here. You're getting around, man. I'm seeing your name on more podcasts than mine, and yeah. I'm starting to get my feelings hurt a little bit.
No.
You've been making the rounds.
You're my go-to guy for podcasts. You haven't lost a loyal follower.
Okay.
Not even close. Yeah. And I know this is like our 30th. I think it's our 29th or 30th podcast together.
Something crazy like that. I lost count, and I even keep a spreadsheet, and I lost count. But when I started doing this, when you and I first started talking back in the early 2000s, and everyone was talking about swing mechanics, everyone's still talking about swing mechanics. And I came across here, I'm going, I need more than swing mechanics, because I'm not going to work on that, because I really believe in the mental game approach and strategic approach to golf. And you were like, yeah, absolutely. It seems like over the last 20 years of doing this, there's more and more people talking about the mental game. Do you see that being true too, or is that just my own ego?
No, it's definitely true. And I saw the shift happen right around the time COVID hit 3 or 4 years ago. I was getting more and more new students who had been to some of the top, what I would call body-only, highly technical, mechanical approach type teachers, and not only not got any improvement from it, but some of these guys and gals got the yips from it, from an overly technical approach, right? And that used to be a thing that would only happen to like the occasional tour pro, like Seve Ballesteros got the yips, full swing yips toward the end of his career when he went to Mac O'Grady, who's a very highly technical teacher. And Ian Baker Finch got driver yips after trying to work with David Ledbetter to improve his distance off the tee right after he had won the British Open. And there are multiple examples of people on tour who got worse when they tried to change their swing. And yet, even in spite of that, it became the dominant paradigm, especially once the internet really took hold, 30 years ago. And especially when Instagram really hit about 12, 15 years ago. So I'm getting contacted by people all the time who have gotten worse from this highly technical body-only approach. And they're starting to embrace a mind-body connection approach, which means how you use your mental focus ability and the emotional side of your personality has a direct effect on your swing mechanics, meaning the mechanics don't exist in a vacuum. And the greatest example of this is someone who has severe yips. Someone who has severe yips is an extreme example of the power of the mind-body connection, but on the negative side of it, meaning when you're not using your emotions properly and when you're not using your mental focus ability properly, you can end up with a full-blown case of the yips. And of course, the cure for that that malady is embracing the idea of the mind-body connection. Yep.
Wow. There's so much conversation about, like we said, mechanics. I mean, like we just had an episode a couple weeks ago about the physics of the golf swing. We had a gentleman who's a mechanical engineer, Jusheng Wang, and just wanting to go over the physics of how it is to hit a golf swing. Honestly, I was a little bit lost because I was like, I can't make those adjustments. Even if I do understand what the heck he was talking about, those are adjustments that are difficult to do. But I can get myself into a better headspace, but I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think any type of scientific research, that type of sort of road to trying to understand the golf swing better, to me, that only makes sense if you're trying to convince a teacher to change his or her paradigm for how they teach the golf swing, or you're trying to convince a student that a swing change is necessary, because what you're doing right now, Bob, for example, would be you're violating this law of physics. This is what the research says the best players in the world are doing, and you're doing something very different. So it has a role as a convincer type of evidence that a change might be necessary. But I don't think you can be thinking about your body, particularly highly technical swing thoughts. And we've done many podcasts on this. They just don't work. And they, in fact, can trigger a yip. And quite often they do.
Yeah. I played with a guy. I played with a guy the other day. Very chatty fellow. I mean, talked to his putter the whole time. I mean, he was chatty. And we meet each other on the first tee. It's like, this guy's joining you. Okay, fine. So we meet each other on first tee, and he's like, "Oh, do you play?" I'm like, "Yeah, I play regularly." It's like, and he asked me, "Do you have a handicap?" I said, "Yeah, actually, right now I'm down to a 9.8, something like that." Yeah. And I said, "What about you? You keep a handicap?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm a 24." I'm like, "Okay, all right, I know what I'm getting myself into." Probably about the 10th, 11th, 12th hole, somewhere in there, after he's learned that I do this podcast and stuff, he's like, "Listen, if you notice anything, you want to tell me anything, please go ahead and say it, because I can change my swing in a drop of a hat. I can make adjustments." And then he shanks the ball, and then he hooks it into the woods. Yeah. And I'm like, "No, you can't. I mean, how it's not easy to change your swing on the fly, let alone ever. And then you just told me you're a 24. So why are you trying to give me advice?"
I'll tell you a funny story apropos of your story, which is my first year teaching 33 years ago in Hawaii. I had about the same guy, I think it was a 26 handicap. And I said, "Well, show me what you got. Let me see you hit a few." He goes, "What swing do you want?" I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I have a Jack Nicklaus swing. I have a Lee Trevino swing, and I have a Gary Player swing." Which, those are very different swings, first of all, quite a bit different. But I said, "Well, you really play with three different swings?" Well, he goes, "Well, I only use one swing per shot, obviously, but yeah." I go, "Show me your Gary Player swing. Look nothing like Gary Player." Right? And I said, "Show me your Trevino swing. And it looked nothing like Lee. Show me your Nicklaus swing. Looked nothing like Jack." So I took my camera out. This is back in the day when they were big, bulky cameras.
Yeah.
And I filmed him doing his version of the three swings. And of course, all three were identical, and they were really, really, really bad golf swings.
Ouch. Right?
And I said to him, I go, you're just living in denial if you think you can change your swing like that and make it like these three very different styles of swinging, right? No, people just they do what their unconscious mind swing map dictates is what your body does. Right. So the change has to start with the mental pictures, the conclusions, the beliefs at the unconscious mind level. That's the first really major step in the swing change process. And then after that happens, then you can do reps, right? Lots of reps, slow motion reps in front of a mirror primarily, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's what's called closed loop in neurophysiology. There's an idea of open loop versus closed loop. So when you're moving slowly, where you have real-time feedback, meaning your reflection in the mirror. You can employ your feed-forward system to make your body do something you want it to do that's not currently a habit. Because you're moving slowly, your feed-forward system will listen to your conscious mind, right? But you're also seeing your reflection. You're making subtle adjustments to what you're seeing in the mirror. That's your feedback system, right? And that's the fastest way to learn any movement pattern skill. Think of it as hammering a nail. If you're hammering a nail, and especially if you're not a really skilled carpenter, typically when you hammer the nail, the first time you hit it, again, if you don't do it for a living, it'll bend a little bit left or right, maybe, right? It doesn't go straight in because you're not really skilled at it. So then you realize, the first tap of the nail, it bent like a degree left. So now I got to come in from the left and kind of hit down and a little to the right to straighten the nail out. That's what I'm talking about. That's the feed forward system, which is the striking the nail, and the feedback system is making the adjustments mid strike. And again, that can only be done, the closed loop system. There's been tons of research on this. Can only works when you're moving slowly. As soon as you're moving fast, whether you know it or not, your body only listens to the commands coming from your unconscious mind swing map or swing blueprint, right? And every golfer has formed beliefs or unconscious visual mental pictures about what the physics of the swing should be, particularly in terms about what should happen during impact, what makes the ball go far, what makes the ball go straight. So it's a combination of geometry and physics, beliefs in those two areas. And that's what your body listens to when you're moving at normal tempo. It doesn't listen to conscious mind swing thoughts. That's the big mass hallucination that we have in our sport. And it doesn't happen in any other sport except for golf. And golf is the most poorly performed sport at the amateur level by far compared to all the other sports. I mean, I work with people all the time who are like, they'll tell me, I'm a zero hand. If you could handicap downhill ski racing, I'm a 0 handicap at alpine skiing, downhill skiing. I'm a 3 handicap at tennis. I'm a 5 handicap at shooting a gun at a target. I play once a week in a men's basketball league, and I'm a 5 handicap basketball player. But I've been playing golf for 30 years, and I'm a 20 handicap at golf. Why is that?
Wow.
And my answer is big part of the reason is the instruction paradigm, the ethos, the underlying philosophy about how to coach the game is incredibly dysfunctional. And it's rooted in the era when golf began, which is in the 14th century in Scotland. It's toward the end of the Dark Ages when golf became a sport. And we still have Dark Ages thinking when it comes to the process of making a swing change and when it comes to the mental game especially. We have a 21st version of what should happen with body and club due to all the recent last 30, 40 years, scientific research on the biomechanics of the golf swing. So that's becoming more and more of a consensus among top teachers. But what's holding us back is the application part. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a time out. I want to come back to the Dark Ages when we return. We'll be right back. It's fascinating information and makes total sense that you can be a crappy golfer or have a high handicap, but you can excel because golf's the hardest sport. I mean, we've all, everybody who's listened, it's the hardest thing. It's so hard because the ball's sitting here, right? Yeah, and
there's lots of reasons why it's hard. Yeah, beyond the coaching paradigm being in the Dark Ages, for sure.
And then watching it on television, it's like, I can do that. And you go out there, and it's like, no, you can't. Like I had a young man on recently who knew nothing about the game, knew nothing about golf, knew nothing about what goes in his bag. But he was convinced, and he was going to start a YouTube channel that he's going to I'm going to become a scratch golfer. And he thought he can get this done in a couple years or a couple months. And watching his progress, he's putting out videos every day, and watching his progress, it's like, I'm sorry, man. I wish you all the best in the world, but you don't have a clue of what you get yourself into.
I agree. People have no idea how hard it is. Even with the right approach in terms of the application, how to change your swing, how to use your mind as a tool to play better golf. It still takes time. And it's a lot of it in golf is 3 steps forward, a half a step back, 2 steps forward, a step back. That's the norm. And that's with top teachers and really highly educated students, which I tend to have. It's almost never is it a straight line. Now, every once in a while, I'll get 1 or 2 people a year who can make changes really fast. But that's like way less than 0.1% of golfers, right? Yeah. And then there's random reinforcement, which was one of the first topics we talked about 18 years ago, which people don't talk about still today much, which is that's the primary reason why the person you mentioned has that delusion, which is people can't distinguish between luck and skill. In other words, random reinforcement is a thing in psychology, and it means when a mammal's brain is confronted with a difficult, challenging task, something that's by its very nature leads to failure 90% of the time and success only 10%. When you do achieve the successful outcome, when you're trying to do the difficult task, your brain gets flooded with neurochemicals like beta endorphins and dopamine and serotonin. You get a high. You get a natural drug high that your brain's neurotransmitters produce. And that high produces irrational thinking. In other words, someone who can't break 90 on a regular basis, when they hit that 1 or 2 really good shots per round, those are mostly, if not entirely, luck, not skill. But the golfer's ego doesn't want to accept that was purely luck or mostly luck. They want to take ownership, and it creates this belief that, my swing's really not that bad. It's pretty good.
And
right?
they're also at that point, they're saying, oh yeah, I hit the ball like 7-iron. I hit the ball 170, 185. It's like, no, you don't. Right. If you did it once, that doesn't mean that's how far you hit it.
Yeah. I had a guy call me up about 25 years ago and said, you worked with my friend Joe last summer and you took him from a 20 to a 12 in 5 months. And so you must be good at this. So I want to take lessons from you, but I'm not really sure I need to work on my swing. Maybe we should work on mental game or short game or putting. And I said, well, that's fine. What's your handicap? He goes, I'm a 30, but I have a really good swing. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, my swing's really good. My local pro told me my swing's fine. My friends who play golf told me my swing's fine. I go, let me get this straight. You're a 30 handicap and you think your swing is good? He goes, yeah. I go, no, you don't have a good swing. Those people were either lying to you or they were playing a cruel joke on you, because to have a good swing, almost by definition, you have to be able to break 80 on a consistent basis to have a good swing. But he had this idea. He goes, well, how if that's true, how come I can hit that one drive per round that goes 270 yards right down the middle of the fairway? I go, that was a lucky shot. That was luck, not skill. Right? But, when you're talking to someone who's under the influence of random reinforcement, it falls in line with some of the recent research from neuroscience on why human beings have a tendency to create suffering for themselves or other people, which is, unfortunately, the Enlightenment philosophers, their view of human nature has been proven conclusively by modern neuroscience and neuropsychology to be wrong. Human beings are not primarily rational creatures. They're primarily irrational animals. and humans have an amazing capacity for self-delusion, right?
Yeah.
And again, mainly due to random reinforcement. There was a gal here at our local course years ago. This is a person who's never shot better than 120 in her life.
And she keeps coming back?
Oh, yeah, she loves it, which is fine. You don't have to only play golf for score. There's other reasons to play golf other than improvement.
Absolutely.
But she accidentally hit 3 good shots in a row on a short par 5 at our course here in Enterprise, which is, from the women's tees, it's about 460 yards, I think, something like that. So she topped, and it was a very hot day in the summer, and they hadn't been watering the fairways as often as they should have. So the ground was rock hard. So she had a very long drive that probably never got more than 10 feet in the air. So it was sort of a low hook. So it rolled out like probably 70 yards. She did the same thing on her next shot with her 3-wood. And somehow it got close to the green. And I forgot how far away she was, but maybe within 50 yards or so. And she hit a little 50-yard pitch, and it went in the hole. And I happened to be practicing nearby, and I saw this. And she started doing this little dance with her hands up in the air like this. And she said, woohoo, woohoo, woohoo. woo. And I realized that's the sound and that's the dance that you see in Vegas in the casino when someone gets lucky playing slots and they get 3 lemons to come up and they win like, $5,000. That's the sound of being lucky.
Yeah.
And you hear that sound on the golf course all the time, particularly among mid to high handicaps.
Wow. So wait a minute. I want to back up to that guy who called you and said, you helped my friend. And then you told him, no, actually you suck. You were just lucky, and
in a nice way he said that. Yeah.
Yeah. But did he hire you?
Yeah.
He did.
He did. He actually, and he was fine. We ended up having a good relationship and we worked together and he was very successful, but he had to have the Band-Aid ripped off. He had a Band-Aid that said, I'm not as bad as I probably believe I am deep down because other people keep telling me my swing is okay. Well, it's nonsense. I mean, who talks about this a lot? You don't hear it much anymore, but in Bob Rotella's early books, particularly in his first book, which was Golf is Not a Game Perfect, he talks about this tendency for golfers to not accept how bad they really are. Again, I'm not talking all golf, I'm talking mid to high handicaps, right? And he said one of the reasons why we have such a dysfunctional coaching culture is because of the wealth and the power imbalance between the original American golf teachers who were actually imported from Scotland by the DuPonts and the Carnegies and the Rockefellers back in the 1890s in the Gilded Age when it was an oligarchy, even not like it is now. It's a worse oligarchy today, but back then it was an oligarchy, and there were literally there was only a couple of public golf courses in the entire country. They were all places like Shinnecock, private courses that only the super wealthy could afford to play. And they would import, Seamus McIntyre from Edinburgh to come to be the teaching pro. He wasn't even allowed to change into his spikes in the clubhouse. He wasn't allowed in the clubhouse. He was a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
So you think he's going to risk his job by telling Mr. Rockefeller that your swing sucks? It's not going to happen. He's going to, in other words, he has a financial incentive to lie to the student. And there's a brilliant chapter in that book where Rotella dissects how this happened. And I contrast it with the way I think the most effectively taught sport by far in the history of sports is our Asian martial arts, which I grew up in, as you know. In the Asian martial arts tradition, there's also a power imbalance, but it's on the healthy side, meaning the teacher is up here on a pedestal and you're down here at the bottom. And slowly, as you acquire skill, you climb the stairway to proficiency, say, in Japanese karate, and maybe 10 years later you're equal to the teacher. And
you get a different color belt.
You would never think.
Right.
Exactly. You get different colored belts.
Right.
Exactly,
well, isn't that how you get to move back in the tee boxes? it's like getting different color belts.
I never thought about that. That's actually right. That's actually quite good, Fred. Yeah. It is sort of similar to that. But the point is, it's built in that the teacher knows what the hell he's talking about. And you would never, if you did question the teacher, like when I was learning how to do a rising block, which is this motion, I can still do it fast. And I haven't had any instruction in this since I was a little kid. But I learned how to do this, and I learned to do this and this. So it's innate now. But can you imagine if here I am, an 11-year-old kid, if I said to the karate teacher, no, actually, you know what? I saw something online the other day. Some other martial arts teacher says that your way of doing it is wrong, and I should do it this way. Or I got into a bar fight yesterday, and I did something different than what you've been teaching me, and it worked pretty well. That level of dysfunction doesn't exist. So in other words, but in golf it does. And the greatest example of this is this idea that we're all kind of equal, that even the teachers and the top players, there's this level playing field, which is, again, highly dysfunctional. Gary Player was leading back in the day. I think it was in the late 70s, the U.S. Open. And I think it was at Shinnecock, one of those New York courses. And he's waiting for his limousine to pick him up in front of the Plaza Hotel in Midtown Manhattan to go to the golf course on Sunday morning. And he's got like a 3-shot lead. His doorman says to him, I saw your swing yesterday on TV, and I noticed this hitch at the top of your backswing. Maybe if you did this. And Gary Player listened to the guy and took it seriously. I'm not making this up. Yeah. So this idea that we're all level and that everybody's entitled to an equal equally valid opinion is BS. It's classic BS.
And
there are actually people who know more than you do, than the average golfer does about how this stuff works, right? There are actually experts in the field. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when the phrase better lucky than good comes up, which I hate. I hate that phrase. It's like, no, I'm sorry. I'd much rather be good. All right. We're going to take another time out. We'll be right back. So just recently at the Open Championship here, 2023, Royal Liverpool, Brian Harman grinded it out.
Amazing.
I mean, this was, it really was truly remarkable to watch this guy grind it out with some of the top names in the sport struggling on this golf course. I mean, the golf course was clearly in charge here, which is, as a recreational golfer, that makes me nuts. But at that level, I get it. Go ahead and beat the course, because you don't beat the other players, you beat the course, right? But what as someone who really specializes and focuses on the yips, what was your feeling watching this guy with his setup and his waggle going on and on?
I had so many people email
I counted
me.
13 different times he would waggle. And he admits it. He knows. I saw a video of him today saying, yeah, I know it, but I used to play so fast. And this was from Brian Harman. He says, I used to play so fast that I ended up waiting around all the time. And another player said, take your time, man. You got plenty of time out there. So he started doing that, waiting till he got ready. But he knows that he's slow, and it's a conscious effort to slow everything down to play better. Yeah. But what happened with you on this guy?
Well, first of all, let me come back to that point. What I loved is he said in the press conference after, he said, I stayed with my process. And part of the process, which he did allude to later in the interview, was staying in the present moment, meaning he said, I didn't think about winning the tournament until I hit that bunker shot on 18. And then I knew I just had to, I think he could have 7 putted from there and still won or something. He won by 6. And of course, he ended up making the putt. He got up and down from a pretty difficult bunker lie. But he said, I stayed in my process until then. I didn't get ahead of myself. I didn't go into the future saying, what if I win the Open, which is great. That's exactly what I teach people to do, to stay in the present moment. Paul Azinger commented about it. He said, the reason Brian Harman won the Open is, and the reason he basically blew away the field, is he had the ability to quiet his mind. And that's what I teach people how to do, especially if they have yips. But back to your original question about how much time he spends over the ball. We talked about this in other podcasts, but that's one of the 2 primary ways you can do the last stage of a pre-shot routine in golf. The 2 primary ways are the Jack Nicklaus non-automatic method, which is what Harman used, and the Tiger Woods automatic method. Today, Jordan Spieth, Patrick Cantlay, they're kind of slow over the ball.
Yeah.
Rory McIlroy, they all use the Jack Nicklaus method, but I strongly recommend to almost everybody I work with, particularly amateurs, to not use that method. It has too many drawbacks to it. In fact, the vast majority of tour pros and top college players, top amateur players, they use the more modern way, which is to have a step-by-step routine you go through to trigger your takeaway, and that doesn't vary. So it's always 3 waggles. Well, it's the very end of the pre-shot routine. It's basically how do you get your swing started? What's going on just before you trigger your takeaway? So in this method, you use the same number of waggles. It could be 1 waggle, could be 6, doesn't matter. But you decide, I'm going to practice my what I call an automatic swing trigger ritual, and I'm going to have 3 waggles while I look at the target, come back, stretch my elbows out, and then start my takeaway. So everything's done. So you memorize a little ritual. In the one I teach, there's 7 steps. And so you go through a 7-step ritual. Whereas if you watch Rory McIlroy, as great as he is, sometimes he takes, I think the least I've ever seen him take is 2 waggles. And I think I've seen him take maybe 6 or 7. So he's somewhere in that range. But watch Tiger Woods. It's always 2 waggles, stretches, elbows, go. I think I told you I had that debate when I was 12 years old with Nicklaus about this over lunch at the Western Open. I think we talked about that one of the podcasts. No?
You remember our podcast much better than I do because I keep doing them and they all get mushed together into one lump.
You do a lot more than I do. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I had this debate with Nicklaus because Nicklaus got fined for slow play. His first two or 3 years on tour back in the early 60s, it was similar to Harmon. He would sometimes spend like a minute and a half over the ball, waggling, shuffling his feet, and not starting. And he got fined thousands of dollars by the PGA Tour Board for that. And I had this conversation, which turned into a debate when I was 12. He was 22. And I said, I mentioned that you spend a lot of time over the ball, Mr. Nicklaus, and when I do it that way, I play worse. And he said, well, why would you play worse? I go, well, I'm waiting. Because I asked him, what's going through your mind? He goes, well, I'm waggling. This is what these other people are doing. This is what Jordan's doing. This is what Patrick Cantlay's doing. This is what Harmon's doing. They're waiting till they feel comfortable and confident to start. So there's a slow buildup of sort of mental energy, kind of like this. And then you reach a peak where your body decides to start your takeaway. The problem with that approach is, again, unless you're extremely confident golfer, like world class, while you're waiting to feel confident and comfortable, the demons can come in, the negative thoughts and emotions that can trigger a bad swing or yip. But I tried to explain this to Nicklaus. He said, I don't understand. He said, you're standing over the shot while you're waggling and shuffling your feet and looking at the target, and you're seeing the ball not go to the target successfully? I go, yeah. I see myself shanking it into the water or pulling it 30 yards left over the green. Or he goes, why would you have negative thoughts like that about the outcome of the shot? Don't you want to send the ball to the target successfully? I go, of course I do, but I'm human. And of course the negative thoughts come in, right? I promise you, when Rory McIlroy's doing that, he's not thinking about how he's going to miss it. He's thinking about, this is going to be so effing good. I can't wait to hit this shot. And that's what Nicklaus was feeling. But that's not really a normal state of consciousness for the 99% of golfers out there, including most tour pros. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it takes a much higher level of confidence than the average person has.
So when you're teaching somebody, do you promote a waggle? Do you let them because I don't have a waggle. I walk up to the ball and I hit it. I try to. Yeah. I do all my waggling when I'm standing behind the ball and looking down the fairway. But do you promote a waggle? And what's the point? What's the purpose?
Read 5 Lessons, Hogan's second book. He has 3 pages in there on the waggle. And in one page, the first page talking about it, he says something like, this is the most important part of the swing or one of the most important parts. When you waggle, and he says, the old Scottish phrase is, as you waggle, so shall ye swing. So if you watch Hogan waggle, in fact, he does today what's the most common type of waggle, where you hinge back your trail wrist like this, back and forth like that.
This is an audio podcast. Jim, it's an audio podcast. You use your words. Well, you can't show me.
Exactly. So hinging your wrist means you flex your wrist backward. The back of your trail hand, so right hand, if you're a right-handed golfer, goes back toward your forearm, not up toward the sky. That's called cocking. So when you hinge back and then forth a little bit, that's the Hogan waggle. And what it does is it reduces the tendency for your mind and body to get frozen from stress or from pressure. So when you're waggling, you're keeping some sense of athletic fluid motion in your body. You're also kind of shuffling your feet a little bit while you waggle. Yeah. There's only been a few great players who don't waggle at all. The English guy, Lee Westwood, he just sits there. He stands there and doesn't move. He looks like he's a 30 handicap. He's just frozen. So obviously it works for him. He doesn't waggle, and he's a incredibly great player, right?
So then I have to ask, is the first move in your takeaway the hinging of your wrists, or are you you're bringing the club back with your arm? Am I supposed to be hinging my wrists on my first move? How do I waggle with my hinge wristing and then don't do that on the swing?
It depends on because again, there are more than one type of swing method out there. And the method that I teach, which is what today, starting 30 years ago, almost all good players do it. do this type of swing model, which I call leverage spin, you start your swing, you start your takeaway with several things happening simultaneously. There's a pivot of your body. Yeah. There's a slight arm swing, and there's wrist hinging and cocking, and they're all happening simultaneously, not sequentially. So there's a wrist component, there's an upper arm component, and there's a pivot component, and they're all happening I can show you. I know it's audio. I can show you if you want.
Well,
should I show you so you know?
Show me, but you need to explain what you're doing, because now I'm terrified actually that I'm going to start thinking about doing that. And it's not something I naturally do.
Oh, well, then I shouldn't show you then. I wouldn't want to do anything that would mess up your game. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
But if you came to me and said, I want to learn your swing method, Waldron, then I would answer the question. Yeah. It's a simultaneous pivot, slight arm push away, and then wrist hinging and cocking all at the same time.
Arm push away? Arm push away?
Yeah,
wait a minute. I try to, if I go out instead or turn, no, wait. So I'm really struggling here. What about I'll just show you. I've noticed, but now is there a turning over of the left? I'm a right-hander. Is there a turning over of the left hand, or should the right hand? No.
There's no forearm rotation at all in the takeaway. Zero.
Oh boy. You've just screwed my game up, man.
Watch, man. Here's the pivot part.
Okay, so you've got your hands. You've crossed your hands across your chest now, and you're rotating. We got to explain this.
This is what I'm doing. I'm showing Fred. If I was going to break it down into the three main components, there's a pivot aspect, which is rotation of hips, core, and torso.
Okay. Along with
a little bit of left side tilt like this. I'm tilting my shoulder girdle about 4 inches down. My left shoulder is going down, my right shoulder is going up. So when I blend those two pieces together, it looks like this, right? This is the takeaway. The arm part is you gently extend your arms. You can think of it, focus on your hands, as if I was going to shake hands to someone standing a little bit to my right like this. There's a little bit of that. I'm overdoing it. You can see it. In reality, it's less. It's just like 6 inches of movement. There's a little of that. And then there's hinging and cocking combined, which looks like that. So when I combine all those things, it just looks like this.
Okay.
And that's what almost all great players today are doing, what I just showed you.
Now, what about the left arm, the left bicep, staying attached to your pecs, to your chest?
Actually the tricep. Yeah, correct. It stays on your pecs almost till the end of takeaway, and then it starts to slide off and up. So when your right elbow folds, when your trail elbow folds at the end, what starts to happen at the end of takeaway, when the trail elbow folds, it raises the arms off of your chest. So the arms go up and down in a V shape in front of your chest as your chest is rotating. They don't stay connected throughout the entire swing.
Okay, I'm about to burst into tears. I need to take another break. I'll be right back. We get so many messages about practicing, but are these the messages we remember when we get to our favorite practice facility? One of my favorites is practice with a purpose, meaning don't just go out and pound ball after ball after ball, but have a method to your madness to work on and achieve something specific. The second is one that we'll hear more about this week on Golf Smarter Mulligans with part 2 of our conversation with Chris Fry in an episode we call Avoiding the Perilous Back9 Blowups.
I want my students to do an equal balance of technique, fundamentals, but also practice like you play. And what that means is pick a target in the distance, hit a driver to it, grab your next club, maybe it's an 8-iron, pick another target, go at it, and be constantly challenging yourself to switch clubs, never letting yourself get into a groove, because we all know you can't get really into that groove of hitting 6 drivers in a row on the golf course. Then once you start to get the hang of that, then challenge yourself to curve shots. I tell a lot of my students, hey, let's just curve this one left to right. I want to see you fade one into the pin in the middle of the range. And they look at me like I'm crazy. You know, they might be a 15 handicapper, and they tell me, I just want to hit it straight. How often do you hit a straight ball? pretty much never. That's the hardest shot in golf. So if you teach yourself to aim left of a pin and visualize the fade and really just work on fading that ball left to right into the pin, you'll surprise yourself more often than not.
That's episode 226, part 2 of our conversation featuring Chris Fry on our sister podcast, Golf Smarter Mulligans, being released this Friday morning. Originally published as a members-only episode in January 2012 means that this insightful conversation has never been shared with the public before. So if you're a fan of Golf Smarter's content, then don't miss the chance to get 2 episodes every week. That's Golf Smarter, Golf's longest running podcast, and Golf Smarter Mulligans, episodes from our archives that revisit the best of Golf Smarter. They're both available for free from wherever you're listening right now. Oh, people frequently ask me, doesn't your mind get overwhelmed with all these conversations? Don't you have information overload? And it's yeah, all the time. So I try to be very selective on what I pick out in a conversation. Course, yeah. But I'm ready. I swear this is the last episode I'm ever going to do, because it's like now my mind is really blown and I have no idea what I'm going to do when I go out there.
Now remember,
you're scaring the crap out of me, Jimmy.
We're two buddies talking swing theory. I'm not saying that you should implement these changes. You just asked me what the model is. So I told you what the model is, but you may not be a candidate for the model. First of all, if you're not willing to put the time in to do work, particularly slow motion mirror work, to learn these component parts I just described, in other words, these are not things to think about over the ball. In my system, there's no swing thoughts, zero. This is just for practice only. You stand in front of a mirror and you learn how to make a proper pivot motion. Then you learn how to make proper wrist action, and then you learn how to make proper arm action, and then you learn how to combine them together.
All right, so let's get to
not stuff that I would ever recommend. Yeah.
All right, let's get back to unconscious competence. Let's talk about quieting the mind, because I had a round recently that it was so hot outside I couldn't think at all, and played great golf. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was so it was so hot, and I kept hydrating. I sip and nibble all the way through, and I'm hydrating, and I'm grazing with my, nuts and peanut butter pretzels and stuff. But I just couldn't think. So I just go up, and I made some incredible shots, and I shot even par on the back nine, and the audience, and I'm sure the audience is getting sick of me talking about this, shooting par. That's every week now. I'm talking about that round weeks ago. It hasn't happened again since. And all I can attribute the whole thing to was that my mind was blank, because I just was so distracted by the heat.
Yeah. Your mind was quiet. Yeah, exactly.
That's
a common thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How do we quiet the mind? How do we get to the unconscious competence that will allow us to be better?
That could literally be, to answer that question would take like 100 podcast episodes.
I'm up to 900.
What's 100 more, Fred? Nothing.
2 years.
Well, the first step, I'll give you the classical Buddhist, since I know you're kind of a bit of a fan of the Buddhist approach. In the Buddhist system, the first step is acknowledging, similar to what we talked about, not being in denial about how crappy your golf swing really is. When you first do sitting meditation, anybody who does sitting meditation, the Buddhist way, which is about trying to connect your consciousness with what is happening in the real world, in the moment, you quickly realize your mind has a mind of its own. It's out of control. The normal state of consciousness is a mind in random chaos. So that's recognizing that's the fact. That's the first step. A lot of people don't want to recognize that their mind's in chaos. And if they're not willing to recognize that, just like if they're not willing to recognize how bad their swing is, they're not a candidate for swing instruction, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're willing to acknowledge, the reason my mental game sucks is because my mind has got a mind of its own, and it's thinking all these negative thoughts and taking me out of the present moment. Then you can do various forms of concentration practice, which in Buddhism are called samatha practice, where your mind is very, very small. We call narrow mode. I have people look at a candle flame for 2 minutes. And the goal is, can you look at a candle flame for 2 minutes and not have any internal psychological reaction to the candle flame? Meaning no thoughts about it, no emotional reaction, no thought, just pure observational awareness using your eyeballs on the candle flame. And then they work up to 5 minutes. So eventually you can stare at a candle flame for 5 minutes and not have anything going on inside your head at all. No reaction to it.
Wow.
So that's an exercise that I teach people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's classical sitting meditation, where you focus your mind in kinesthetic awareness or feel channel, where you feel your belly move in and out with your breath. And you try to keep it there for 20 minutes without your mind wandering off. Yeah. That's another way.
I got monkey mind.
Exactly. We all tend to have monkey mind. And that's why we have, to me, meditation, mindfulness practice is like weightlifting for the mind, or it's like hygiene for the mind. It's psychological hygiene, just like, brushing your teeth is dental hygiene. Everybody should be doing some type of mindfulness practice as a regular part of their lifestyle every day. Then there's walking meditation, where you pick an object for 3 seconds and you look at it. You notice the size, color, and the shape. Then switch your gaze to a second object. Notice its size, color, and shape. Again, it's similar to the candle exercise, except you're walking and you're changing your focal point every 3 seconds.
Can you do that on the golf course?
And the goal is, well, that's what I have my students do when they're walking between shots. So they stay in the present moment. That's the quickest way to stay in the present moment, is to pay attention to the physical environment. Don't go internal. And we talked about a year ago about internal, external.
Yeah,
that's not just during the golf swing. It's when you're walking between shots, you want to stay external too, right? Because if you're internal walking in between shots, you're going to still be internal over the ball probably, which is not good. Yeah,
interesting, fascinating.
So there's other methods, but these are some of the main ones that I work with people on.
Wow. Okay. But getting there, quieting the mind, slowing the mind, getting it to the alpha state, as opposed to the M state for the monkey mind state, or the beta state where it's like really active. I've tried to figure out ways of doing that, but it's hard work.
It is. It takes work, but when you have a reasonable level of mastery over that skill of what we call focused attention, it's not that hard. Once you have a reasonable level of mastery, it's a matter of just, there's a choice, there's willpower involved. Like I can do it really well because I started doing it when I was 10. I'm 72 now, so I've got 62 years of mindfulness practice under my belt, so to speak. So I can put my mind anywhere I want and keep it there for as long as I want, pretty much. So it's not. So to me, it isn't hard to do. I mean,
oh no, it only takes 60 years to get there. Is that what you're saying? That's right. But for me, once you're there, it's not hard. It's a choice. And that's what was cool about watching Harmon talk about how he's not even that. He's only been doing it for a few years apparently, but it is possible to have a measure of control over your consciousness. Yeah. And it's simply a matter of putting your mind where you want to put it and holding it there. Oftentimes people can do it when they're in potentially life-threatening environments. Like my son, I think we talked about my son Kai. For fun, he climbs rock walls 3,000 feet up in the summer, and he climbs frozen waterfalls in the winter. And the reason he likes to do that, for fun, because he said, wait, is it fun for his parents?
No, it's very stressful.
Oh my God. I was like, okay.
And, we've got my 5-year-old grandson. He climbed a 50-foot high rock wall last Labor Day when he was 4.5 years old, straight up.
And didn't
Obviously
think about it at all. Yeah.
Well,
but
no, we wanted, me and my daughter and her husband encouraged it because I raised my kids to no fear. That was part of our parenting style. And I taught my kids how to focus their mind, how to meditate when they were both 3 years old. But in Kai's case, he told me the reason I like it, I feel so alive because, if you make a mistake, you could die. So the fact that death is always there, ready behind you, waiting to tap you on the shoulder, so to speak, it it makes it easier to focus so you don't make a mistake and die because of the mistake. So that environment forces you to be in the present moment and pay attention to what you're doing.
Wow.
Right. And, one thing we've never talked about, and I have talked about it on other podcasts recently, is this came up. I had a YIP student ask me 5 years ago, we were talking about confidence. And he said to me, I got to say, Jim, you're one of the more confident people I've ever met. Why is that? And I go, I don't know. I've always felt if I put my mind to something, I could be reasonably good at it, if not really good at it. He goes, so you're probably most confident in your golf teaching ability. I go, no, not even close. He goes, oh, so you have something else you do really well, like a hobby? I go, no, it's not really a hobby. It's a skill. I go, it's kind of weird. I don't feel that comfortable talking about it. He goes, well, what is it? I go, I'm really good at street fighting. He goes, street fighting? I go, yeah. I got in lots of fights when I was a kid growing up. And every time I got into a fight, without a single exception, I went into that altered state where my mind was extremely quiet, in that meta-aware state. And he goes, well, how many fights did you get in? It took me a few minutes to figure it out. It's like, well, let's see, I started with my first fight when I was 6. My last fight was when 2 guys tried to mug me when I was age 22 in San Francisco, right by Zen Center, Hayton Ashburn, right by Hayton Laguna. That's where Zen Center is. I said, well, probably about 300 fights. He goes, 300 fights? I go, yeah. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. There were gangs. It was a working class neighborhood, a lot of gangs. And my parents taught me never to give in to bullies. And even today, I still hate bullies, right? So I was usually fighting a bully who was picking on some younger kids, right? And I knew before the fight started that I had already won the fight. I was in this, even before the actual blows were thrown, before punches were thrown. I already had concluded, I had a strong belief that it was impossible for me to lose the fight. And when the fight started, my opponent appeared to me to be trying to punch me or kick me in slow motion. And I'm punching like literally that fast, right? Really fast. Even today, I can punch pretty fast. So how could you possibly lose a fight if you're punching really fast and the other guy's punching you like in slow motion? And I got fascinated by that state, which is one of the things, it's one of the origin stories for how I got really fascinated with psychology and consciousness, which eventually allowed me to become a well-known mental game coach and YIPS coach, because I understand what that being in the zone is all about, because I never left the zone in any of those 300 fights I was in. And I won 4 fights against 2 opponents.
Oh my God, Jim. I have no idea.
And for me, it was like people sometimes say, well, why was it easy for you? I go, well, there's a great line. As you know, I'm a film buff. In the movie with Matt Damon, where he plays the math genius. What was it called again?
Good Will Hunting.
Good Will Hunting. Won a bunch of Oscars.
Yeah, Robin Williams.
The Minnie Driver character. Yeah, Robin Williams played the psychotherapist.
How you like them
Minnie
apples?
Driver, his girlfriend. Yeah, I like them. Yeah. She asked him, well, what's it like to be this Einstein-level genius about math and physics? And he said, it's really hard to explain, but, I just think about it and the stuff just comes to me. And that's how fighting was for me. I can vividly remember all of those fights and how I understood intuitively what it was all about. There was something easy. It was like falling off a log. I enjoyed it. It was fun. My mind was crystal clear. It was fun to win, but I was so involved in the process, I wasn't thinking about what's going to happen 10 seconds from now. Complete immersion in the present moment. And then, of course, my focal point was the entire body of my opponent, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, in what I call medium-wide mode. So there's 3 sizes. There's super wide consciousness, there's medium wide, kind of semicircle, and then there's a dot. So when you're fighting, you want to be medium wide. You want to look at the whole body equally, because he could throw a punch with one hand and kick you with his left foot. So you have to see everything equally and then react to it. And then once I would decide where my blow was gonna land, my punch or my kick, then I would focus narrow. Like if I was gonna punch him in the nose, eventually I'd focus on his tip of his nose, and then my fist would go there. And most commonly the fight was over in 3 to 5 seconds. It was really short. So it got me fascinated about what's this zone of peak performance all about, and why can't I do this on the golf course, right? It was always harder for me to do it on the golf course compared to in a street fight.
How old were you when you got married?
Well, it depends how you define marriage. I mean, I made a spiritual commitment to my wife, and she made one to me when I was 23, I think, 24.
Oh,
we've been together for almost 50 years.
Yeah, so you haven't been in a fight since, except marriage, but you haven't been in a fight.
I've had a couple of close ones where the person backed down, but yeah, I haven't been in an actual fight since then.
Does your wife know your pugilistic history?
Oh, of course she does. Yeah. All my friends know, and my family knows it, obviously.
And now we do. I am so flipped out about this story. I cannot believe it. I thought you'd
like this one.
Oh, God, I love it. I'm blown away.
Well, again, the reason I didn't bring it up before was it's kind of a weird thing to think this is the best thing I do. And it literally is the best thing I do. I'm better at fighting than anything else. There's not even a close second. I mean, even today. Well, there's a funny aspect. I'll tell you a funny story about this. I was talking about this with a YIP student the other day about the power of belief and how the as-if principle, which William James, the great American philosopher and founder of American psychology, came up with this principle, back in 1890 something, called the as-if principle, which is the foundation of modern psychotherapy, mainly cognitive behavioral therapy. And I was explaining about when you believe something to be true, you really believe it, your conscious mind and your unconscious mind and your body will react as if it was true, even if from a rational perspective, it's not true, right? Does that make sense? Sure. So that's why if you're going to form a belief about what you're capable of doing, you want to always err on the side of being positive, not negative. And I brought the fighting thing up, and he said, and a friend of mine, when I first was telling a friend of mine, 50 years ago about this, 40 years ago, he said, so you think you're like one of the best fighters in the world? I go, of course I am. He goes, so you think you could beat Muhammad Ali in a fight? I go, yeah, absolutely, I could beat Muhammad Ali. He goes, Jim, do you realize how irrational that is? I go, yeah, I know it's irrational. I'm not saying it's a rational belief. He goes, you probably believe you can beat Bruce Lee too. I go, of course I could beat Bruce Lee in a fight. He goes, that's crazy. I go, I know rationally I would get my ass kicked if I actually tried to fight Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee. But the fact that I believe that I could beat them, I'll last longer in the fight because of that belief. Because my mind-body connection is so strong because I've already formed that belief that I can't lose. I'm going to perform much better under the pressure of fighting these two great fighters. I'll do better. Yeah.
Well, here's the advantage that you have. You're alive. When you're fighting two dead guys, it's not going to be a hard fight.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. We're going to start a whole new podcast, Jim. It's Quick Fights with Jim Waldron, the new podcast here on your favorite podcast network. Jim, this was unbelievable. I can't wait to what happens the next time we have a conversation because I never know. We never know what we're going to say, and we never know where it's going to go. You're always.
It should be a video podcast. It'll be a video podcast if I can get my damn computer to work, and it'll be you and me fighting. It'll be an actual match between you and me.
Oh, that's great! Because that's going to be about an 8-second podcast. I'll have one hand tied
behind my back.
Yeah,
I'll have one hand tied behind, and I'll have a blindfold on.
Good. And I'll have my best.
That'll be the handicap.
And 8 seconds is about as far as I can run, too. Then I'll collapse out of exhaustion. Thank you, Jimmy. It was great. Thank you so much, man.
That was fun. See you next time.
So, being a good golf citizen is really an important thing. At least it is for me. And that includes spending more time fixing divots on the green and focusing on the pace of play based on the group in front of you, not feeling pressured from behind. But it also means that there should be at least, 2 people, probably 3, looking for one of your group's lost ball. If you got a foursome, just make sure that someone is hitting while others are looking. And mostly it means that no one in your group is spending additional time searching through the woods or OB just looking for lost or free balls. Do that on your own time, please. But here's an example of being a good golf citizen that happened to me last weekend that isn't usually discussed. There were 2 couples playing behind us, and one of the women holed out from 125 yards for an eagle. You can imagine that their celebration was loud and joyous. Everyone on at least 6 holes heard them screaming about it. Well, we were on the tee box at the time, and the tee box was just not far from where she just nailed that eagle. I had already teed off, so as she was walking up to the green, I ran over and celebrated with a high five and a hearty congratulations, and then ran back to my group. Look, if there's any joy on the golf course, don't you want to be part of it? I need to provide this public service update to anyone who listens to Golf Smarter or any podcast using Stitcher. As of August 29, 2023, Stitcher is gone. They've ceased operations. So if you need any help migrating to a new podcast app, just write to me and I'll do what I can to help you out. Now, a couple of things about today's show opening. I hope you got my joke as to why I added a taste of the Beatles with the song One After 909, as this is episode 910. Too corny? Too much dad humor? I didn't need to explain it? Sorry. But I do want to welcome this week's Golf Smarter ambassador, Ron Mulligan. Really? Ron, is that your real name? I love that. Ron Mulligan of Lake Orion, Michigan. Ron chose to receive a link for Tony Manzoni's Lost Fundamental video as his thank you gift. And what about you? We'd all like to hear where you live, play, and listen to Golf Smarter. So send me an email and you too can receive a free gift of your choice just for participating. Now, the gifts include Tony Manzoni's video, The Lost Fundamental. It's a private link. Or a box of Odin X1 balls with the Golf Smarter logo. Or how about a glove and glove storage compartment from redroostergolf.com, the unique subscription service that allows you to get a new glove every month. And once you get hooked on that one, I'm telling you, you'll get addicted. Now, I'm going to leave a link in the show notes in today's blog post for all of those things so you can learn more. But write to me, and I'll get back to you with some instructions of what to do and what to say. Send your request to golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com or just click on the Hey Fred button when you're visiting golfsmarter.com.